We asked our viewers to send us first-hand accounts of their stories of demonic possession. This story comes from New York City, and it will freak you out. My name is Julie. My symptoms began approximately 6 months before the incident I am about to describe. At that time, I entered what I would classify as a depressive episode. I had experienced sadness before, but this was different in duration and severity. I stopped responding to messages from friends, my appetite decreased, I lost approximately 15 pounds over the course of 2 months. I had difficulty getting out of bed, I missed work on multiple occasions. I also experienced persistent fatigue. During the 3rd month, I began having intrusive thoughts. These thoughts were not consistent with my normal thinking patterns. They were repetitive and negative. They often involved statements about worthlessness and self-harm, although I did not act on them. By the 4th month, I began to notice what I first interpreted as auditory hallucinations. These were not clear voices. They were more like impressions of words forming in my mind, but they did not feel self-generated. The tone of these impressions was hostile. They were often directed at me. At that time, I did not attribute these experiences to anything supernatural. I believed I was experiencing a worsening mental health condition. The shift occurred in the 5th month. I woke up one morning and felt an immediate sense of dread that was not tied to any specific thought. It was physical. My chest felt tight, my hands were shaking. I also noticed that when I attempted to pray, which I had done intermittently throughout my life, I experienced resistance. I cannot describe this in precise medical terms. It felt like pressure in my head and a tightening in my throat. Over the next 2 weeks, this reaction intensified. Each time I attempted to pray or read scripture, I experienced increased agitation. I also began having physical reactions, including muscle tension in my neck and shoulders. At that point, I contacted my pastor. He is a Pentecostal minister. I had attended his church for approximately 2 years, although not consistently in the months leading up to this. I called him on a Tuesday afternoon. I explained that I had been depressed and that I was now experiencing unusual reactions when I tried to pray. I also told him about the intrusive thoughts and the sense that they were not entirely my own. He asked me a series of questions. These included whether I had engaged in any practices involving occult materials, whether I had been exposed to certain types of media, and whether I had experienced any significant trauma recently. I answered no to all of these. He then asked me to come to the church the following day. I arrived at approximately 10 in the morning. He met me in his office. We spoke for approximately 45 minutes. During that conversation, I began to feel increasingly uncomfortable. I had difficulty maintaining eye contact. I also felt a strong urge to leave the room. At one point, he began to pray out loud. When he did this, I experienced a sharp increase in physical discomfort. My stomach tightened, and I felt a burning sensation in my chest. I also became aware of a thought repeating in my mind that was not consistent with what I wanted to think. The thought was telling me to tell him to stop. I did not tell him to stop. After this, he told me that he believed I might be under what he described as demonic oppression and possibly possession. He said that he wanted to conduct a deliverance session, which he described as an exorcism. I agreed to this. The session took place that same day in a smaller room adjacent to the sanctuary. The room contained a bed, which I believe is normally used for counseling or rest. There were also 2 chairs and a small table. He asked me to lie down on the bed. I complied. At that point, there were 3 other individuals present. They were members of the church. They stood near the walls of the room. They did not speak initially. The pastor stood near the head of the bed. He began by praying. His voice was steady and consistent. Within approximately 1 minute, I began to feel a change in my body. My muscles became tense, particularly in my abdomen and legs. I attempted to relax, but I was not able to do so. At approximately 2 minutes, I began to experience involuntary movements. My back arched slightly and my hands clenched. I did not initiate these movements consciously. The pastor continued praying. He raised his voice slightly. He began issuing what he described as commands directed at the entity he believed was affecting me. At this point, I began to feel what I can only describe as internal resistance. It felt like a force pushing against my attempts to remain calm. My breathing became irregular. I attempted to regulate it, but I was not successful. At approximately 5 minutes, I began to vocalize without intending to. The sounds were not words at first. They were low and strained. I was aware that I was making them, but I did not feel in control of them. The pastor placed his hand on my forehead. When he did this, I experienced a sharp sensation that I would describe as pressure combined with heat. It was not external heat, it felt internal. He then asked one of the other individuals to hand him a small container. I later understood this to be holy water. He sprinkled a small amount onto my forehead. Immediately upon contact, I experienced a burning sensation. This was not mild. It was intense enough that I attempted to turn my head away. My body reacted by arching further. My hands tightened to the point of discomfort. I am aware that water at room temperature should not produce a burning sensation. However, the sensation was consistent with what I would describe as burning. I vocalized more loudly at that point. The sounds were strained. I was also aware of words forming, but they were not words I intended to say. Some of them were negative statements directed at the pastor. I attempted to stop speaking. I was not able to do so consistently. The pastor continued to pray and to issue commands. He repeated phrases instructing the entity to leave. He referenced the authority of Jesus Christ multiple times. Each time he raised his voice, I experienced an increase in physical discomfort. My muscles contracted more strongly. My legs began to move against the surface of the bed in a repetitive motion. I was not directing this movement. At approximately 10 minutes, the burning sensation spread from my forehead to my chest and arms. It was not constant. It occurred in pulses. Each pulse lasted approximately 3 to 5 seconds. During these pulses, my entire body would tense. I would arch my back and press my shoulders into the bed. I attempted to resist this movement, but I was not able to override it. The pastor applied more holy water. Each application produced the same burning sensation. At this point, I began to feel pain more generally throughout my body. It was concentrated in my muscles and joints. It was not localized to one area. I also experienced a sensation of pressure in my head, particularly around my temples. It felt as though something was pushing outward from inside. The pastor continued for what I estimate was between 20 and 30 minutes total, although my perception of time was not precise during the event. During the later portion of the session, I became aware of a shift. The resistance I had been feeling internally began to weaken. The intrusive thoughts became less frequent. The physical reactions continued, but they became less intense over time. At one point, the pastor placed his hand on my forehead again and spoke in a firm tone. Immediately after this, I experienced a final, intense contraction of my muscles. My back arched more strongly than before. I vocalized loudly. Following this, there was a sudden decrease in all symptoms. The burning sensation stopped. The muscle tension released. My breathing returned to a normal pattern. I felt physically exhausted. My body was sore, particularly in my back and arms. I also felt a sense of mental clarity that I had not experienced in several months. The intrusive thoughts were absent at that time. The pastor continued to pray briefly, but at a lower volume. I remained lying on the bed for approximately 15 additional minutes. During that time, I did not experience any further involuntary movements or sensations. When I sat up, I felt weak but stable. In the days following the event, I did not experience a return of the previous symptoms. My mood improved gradually. The sense of dread was no longer present. I was able to pray without experiencing the resistance or physical discomfort that had occurred before.